me?
Susanna.
Okay, hello everybody. It's so nice to begin our new series of seminar PLC occasional seminars. And now we have the Ohio State people here, Byrd Polar Center people here to begin with. So the floor is yours, please.
All right. I'll let Jason get this loaded up. Beautiful. Okay, I'll start. I don't know why my name is first on the slide because I did the least on the presentation, but all right, I'll roll with it. So for those who don't know me, I'm Laura Kissel. I'm the Polar Curator at the Byrd Polar and Climate Research Center, which is part of which is the Polar Archives, essentially, for short.
And I'm Jason Cervenec. I lead the education outreach team at the Byrd Center. Been here for about 13 years. A lot of my work is on our federal grants that connect science to the public. And we also do a fair amount of work in climate resilience and geosciences ed, which all of that touches on this presentation.
Well, hi everyone. Michael Flierl. I'm an associate professor in University Libraries at Ohio State, and I'm also the university's first Provost AI Fellow.
So I should set the mention as we give this presentation. Laura and Michael and I originally gave this last year for a cybersecurity conference that we pitched a presentation on. I think we were definitely a different angle to all the other presenters that were there because we were thinking about this more from the archives and library and collections angle. But it was interesting to sit in a room with others that are dealing with kind of misinformation, disinformation, security landscape, and see how well a lot of this aligned to their work. And I should also mention that the university, Michael mentioned kind of his position with AI. Ohio State's actually hiring 100 faculty. They just announced this week in 3 different domains in AI. So the university is going to is looking very carefully at this on the education front, but also on the research front. Likely, you want me to kick off with this one? I know both of our names were on this. So you'll see at the bottom of the corner, since there's 3 of us here and we have a shared slide deck, you can kind of get some nods as to who's going to present each section. But I think from our work, AI is this large domain and it connects to a lot of different work. I know at the Byrd Center, much of our research is geosciences ed. So that'd be traditional geology, hydrology, climate and atmospheric sciences. But a lot of the work, machine learning is probably the biggest deployment we see here, with individuals having data that's coming in from collections. Those could be samples, and I'll draw extensively from our rock repository collection today. We also have Laura's collection. We have a polar ice collection here. And we also have extensive data sets nationally and also from our individual scientists that are collecting samples and everything from geochemistry to weather station data. But a lot of the topics we'll talk about today is if you're looking at a machine learning project, would traditionally be more on the back end and the front end, where you're looking at acquiring that data and cleaning it and making sense of it and looking at the documentation and figuring out, one, is it something that should be ingested? And if it is, how will you capture that data or weight it? And then also on the documentation side, how do you make sure at the end of a project for somebody using that you captured to the extent that you want to or are able to the metadata, and you don't lose that nuance of what the collection that was ingested to make that product provided and what its limitations are. And so just this is something to frame that larger conversation as you're thinking about AI broadly. This is maybe a very concrete example of what this looks like. I should also mention, for those of you that want to dabble in this space, there is a Google product online called the Thinking Machine. We use it with our younger audiences, specifically 4-H, and it's a great example. And I can give you a 30-second example you can try out yourself. Ask a bunch of your colleagues to take sheets of paper, 3 papers, and draw a picture of a cartoon dog, a cartoon cat, and a cartoon rabbit. And then you can feed those into the machine and label them. And then you can ask another colleague, you ask maybe 10 colleagues to do that, an 11th colleague to draw a picture of one of them and present it. And it will go ahead and sort that picture into a dog, cat, or a rabbit. And the reason I say that's a great example is you can start to see very quickly the limitations of having a very small data set. If you only ask 10 colleagues to draw, it'll be a very different experience than if you ask 100. And if one of your colleagues is maybe from another country where rabbits are depicted differently, or they draw on a different color piece of paper, it might be biased. The data set was biased in some way, and it might not be able to categorize which animal yours is into. And it's a great example for a younger audience, or for maybe an audience that's not is new to AI or machine learning, to see a tangible example of what this process looks like with a very limited data set and examples that are in front of them. This was brought up, actually, Michael brought this to our attention as a great example if you're thinking AI hasn't already affected our lives. One example from pop culture in the US is our Billboard's top country song currently in the US. So this is a ranking of country songs by type of music, by genre, is currently a tune that was created by AI, and it was popular enough to sell a lot of albums or sell a lot of streams. People have purchased it or are streaming it extensively, and now it's reached the top of the Billboard charts. Laura, I know you had an example.
Yeah, so even if you don't listen to country music, AI is just ubiquitous now in our daily life, even if you didn't realize it, right? I think we probably all realize that these tools depicted here, Alexa, Siri, Maps, geez, I use Maps like daily, you know, and the ability to know that there's a traffic snarl on 315 on the way home is partly predictive AI. Um, just it's just crazy if you start to think about it, how much this has already impacted us without probably even really thinking a whole lot about it. Beep.
Thanks,
Which
Laura.
brings us to the idea of provenance in terms of where is AI getting the information, right? So provenance is such an old idea. When we talk about data provenance, we need to think about it from its historical standpoint. So in terms of provenance, the place of origin, the earliest known history of something, a record of ownership of a work of art or an antique or an image or a document, used as a guide to authenticity or quality. So in the world of historical research, this is in fact one of the first questions that we might ask. What is the provenance? Where did this information come from? So provenance can be thought of as a combination of the two concepts that are depicted on screen. Beep. It's the best part about this presentation, the beep. Okay, so the implications of provenance are intertwined with trust and the reliability of evidence. So for those who may or may not be familiar with the story, it's still a great story, even if you know all about it. So in 1906, Dr. Frederick Cook claimed to be the first to summit Mount McKinley. He published the image that is depicted on the left side of your screen. So it's a cropped image if you look to the other image, right? If you look closely, you can see their edges that were cropped off. But the image on the left is the one that he published, and that was his proof. But for those who know Mount McKinley, are we calling it Denali now or Mount McKinley? I really don't know. Whatever we're calling it now, Mount McKinley, Denali, Mount McKinley, Denali. The point is that for those who know that area, they could tell that this was not, in fact, at the summit at all. Thank you. Thank you. It was not a summit at all. It was like 6,000 feet, I think. And the summit's way higher than that. So essentially what this did when this information came out, it ruined Dr. Cook's credibility completely, both before everything he accomplished before and anything he would accomplish after was called into question. So the ideas of provenance and reliability of information and evidence are not, these are not new concepts and not anything new that we haven't had to think about before. You're up, Jason.
So a few other examples we have, as Laura mentioned, a lot of analog documents that are in the collection. Some of our polar meteorology group at the Byrd Center has actually used some of those in order to look retroactively at weather and climate in Antarctica and use those records that extend our time period, but also our geographic coverage in order to do so. Obviously, there's new routes available to digitize that information and then hopefully to capture some of the metadata. There's even been teams that have had corrections. They've been able, knowing the original instrument they use, that they can correct 4 different factors if they know it consistently measures above or below. And there's been work in order to do that just to extend the record. I'll also feature some collections from our rock repository and show you the extent of the metadata and how our teams have been trying to be very deliberate in capturing more information than might be expected of them. So these are 2 images, and what I did is I went to our collection and I grabbed one image, and then I asked Gemini from Google in order to create the second image. And I just asked for a picture of what the Taylor Nunatak in Antarctica would look like as if it was photographed from a 1970s camera. So you can prompt it not just to give you an image, but to give you an image in a certain style that was taken by a certain type of instrument. One of these is clearly the Taylor Nunatak and one is not. I think I'm not sure if that will surprise you a lot if you know anything about polar geography. There's some attributes that are quite unique to the geography there, and asking anything to create a Nunatak is probably challenging because there's not extensive photos of features like that. There's only a limited number of people that have gone to polar regions. You're more likely to see these in Antarctica. A lot of those collections until recently may not have been searchable. And even those of us at the Byrd Center that have extensive collections, maybe it's not easily crawlable by a tool that would ingest it. So asking it to create a picture of a mountain that extends above an ice sheet, here you can see that it located it close to an ocean. You really don't have an ice sheet depicted whatsoever. It obviously didn't succeed in doing that task. And I think for some of the questions that are going to be asked of polar content, one is, are our collections something that can be drawn into those tools in order to create useful outputs? In this case, it gave me no warning whatsoever to its confidence that it had created a picture of that, and didn't really seemed oblivious to the fact that when it generated it, the basic geography didn't align with what you would call that geographic feature. That photograph's actually from the rock repository collection. So the Byrd Center is home to about 64,000 rock samples right now. It's the US collection of samples brought back from polar regions. Almost all of it's Antarctic. There's a small portion that's from Alaska and northern Canada. But this collection, in addition to having the samples themselves and the photographs of the samples, has pretty extensive metadata. And we've also built the system in order to capture and store photos or videos taken on site, and also pictures from journals or the journals themselves. If there was a rock face that was drawn into there. You can see on this image itself, that photograph that I showed you, it shows you that it's a photograph. But the team's also been pretty deliberate to talk about the year collected in the field, but also to document, and in this case, it might seem rather boring. Anne Gruneau is the curator for our collection. Obviously, she's the person who collected it in the field, the photographer itself on the field campaign. She also had it in her collection, so she's the donor. And then is the person who it's documented as having been accessioned into the collection with all of this additional data. It was a photograph she collected herself. But being able to document also each of the individuals and how the provenance of who took it, who passed it on to somebody else who ended up giving it to the collection is important. I can show you some other examples here. The database, if you visit it, is the Polar Rock Repository at Ohio State. This is just what the website looks like, and it shows you where all the different items are from. Probably one of the ones that really stands out to me is volcanic bombs. So seldom in geology can you actually capture data on the generation of the item itself, right? Most geologic events happen far into the past, but Erebus, which is the most southern active volcano, has volcanic bombs that are being emitted from it. So you have lava that's being thrown great distances, it's cooling, and then it's impacting a site. And people that are much more courageous than me decided they'd like to study this. And so we do have artifacts coming back that are rock samples. They're glass. They're actually pretty rough to handle in your hands. And if you look at those, this is what some of the metadata looks like for that. If you can just zoom in, it'll tell you the type of rock. But what's quite interesting, and I'll dive into this a bit more in a second, bomb erupted at 21:48 local time, 8:48 universal time, and then it gives the a little more information about that. But in this case, we actually know when that piece of rock was created and the coordinates for it. For our collections, we get a lot of samples back, and we actually try to work really hard to get samples back when people, before retirement or before they pass away, because without their logbook that includes all of these details, including the coordinates, those samples, however beautiful, are completely irrelevant. You know, we also link publications there, but donor and collector in this case. So we have that. Sometimes when we get samples back, somebody has passed away and they have a detailed logbook, but the numbers on it might not match up with the logbook itself or the manifest. And so the teams are even quite detailed. If they don't alter those names, they keep the original numbering, but if they have to resolve some disagreement with the manifest and the samples, they annotate who made that decision and what decision they made. So if sometime in the future we find out we interpreted stuff wrong, we clearly know what the original numbering was, what our numbering was, and why that conscious decision was made to rectify two samples that maybe didn't seem to go together. So somebody can back up that potential mistake in the future. This is what some of the log details look like for those samples that come in. So it tells you the sample coordinates and time and date with great specificity. So this is an example of how a specific collection at the university tries to capture that provenance and authenticity. Almost everything we have is coming from a researcher that's been doing field work. So we already know their university affiliation, their credentials. We can capture that all in the system. The publications and peer review details are there. The journals in many cases are sent to us or scanned, so we have images. But it also speaks to the trust of the institution that we are doing our due diligence to making sure that we are accurate in stuff that we're transcribing. Things are checked. We're documenting changes or those details that we have to resolve ourselves so that the institutional trust is quite high for people in the future to use the collection, and that are not having good diligent follow through with that and having good processes in place would undermine that trust for people that are going to use these collections 50 years from now when we're long since gone. I will mention, just to call it to Erica Malatek, who's the assistant curator of the repository. She helped us get this together. And one note in talking to her that I wanted to point out is the consent aspect. I'm not a librarian, but discussing kind of FAIR and how we think of consent with samples. Almost everything in our collection is Antarctic. And because there's not a lot of Arctic samples, consent doesn't really come into play as much because there's no indigenous communities or countries that have territorial claims over Antarctica. Obviously, that would be different if you were dealing with collections from a different part of the world. Laura and I wanted to put this up. I think we kind of laugh because, you know, we think about the first portion of my life when I was really young being mostly analog. And then, Laura, I guess we were both kind of hitting the prime of our life when these came about, right? I think our car had a cassette player at one point, and then it was CD. But I don't know, maybe we should ask everybody to raise a hand if they use the zip drive.
Oh, that was the best. The zip drive. Come on now. When you got a zip drive, you could store a whole lot on that little tiny disk. It was a good thing.
Really durable too. Like you put it in your pocket with the case and you felt confident you were going to destroy the thing.
Yes, it was. It was very thick.
Yeah. So, I mean, so much of, and our team deals with, I think of our rock samples, you know, a physical item that even if the database was to go away, the item would still be there. Obviously, we wouldn't have the coordinates, which would be a problem. But then in Laura's collection, we have items and images. But then I sit on 22 terabytes of 360 video. Some of this video will be landscapes that the ice will not exist in the future. We have digital photos from teams that are taken, some of which are more organized than others, and we may not have a finding aid for them. How is it different when you have the physical item itself versus in digital form? Like, one, can you even read it? Can you access it? The metadata, the product itself might not even exist or be readable beyond just the metadata. And something that we'll put a citation here later. What do we do with this time period where we move from analog, we have robust collections, we move to digital, we maybe had a pretty robust research data set, but now we're in a period of digital products for researchers maybe being stored and preserved with metadata. But in the US, we have a lot of departments and agencies which create digital products for use immediately. And they're really not storing those historical items that can be used by researchers later on. They're only generating and storing the current or maybe the previous version for comparison. So what happens in 10 or 20 years when historians start to dig into stuff like tax records or city development or patterns, and all of a sudden you find out, geez, nobody kept any of that stuff. There's this period of no data. Recent stuff, yes. Analog stuff, yes. Maybe even early digital, but this period of things that weren't preserved because there wasn't the expectation or the thoughtfulness that an archivist or a historian was going to actually dig into it for some useful purpose that nobody really considered. And in the US, we definitely haven't really thought of that. We'll put a reference at the end. Other countries, depending on where you are, have that might make it more difficult in the future for historians to do work.
A comment on that too, just to bring it back to technologies and everything. So the digital world in archive, it's like freaking overwhelming. Okay, so think about the days when you purchased 24 or 36 roll of film for your 35 millimeter. Okay, you shot photos, you did not know what they were going to look like. You got them developed, you threw away, I don't know, 8 or 10. You kept only the good ones, right? In a world of digital photography, let's just use that as an example. We shoot gazillions and we don't really weed them. We really don't. We're not good at about that at all as humans. It's overwhelming. So when you think about that in terms of reliability and we're not presenting the best of the best, right? I think in an analog world that was what we were trying to do. We were trying to present the best of the best. Now we just fling it all out there. And so there's not really a curation aspect in a lot of ways. So when you think about AI and what it's working with, you have the situation where, one, not all of the world's knowledge is on the internet. So you have that. And then you also have this other situation where, again, we're just flinging crap out there without any real curation or analysis of accuracy. It's a lot. Jason's example showing that rock repository database is what we need to be doing, not really what we are doing in many cases. So, and who among us has not put, whatever on a CD and then years later tried to read it and found out that you just made yourself a coaster for your coffee because it no longer opens, So again, these things that we thought we knew what we were doing in the 90s, I'd say, is our, going to be that gap where we, again, as Jason was saying, we've got the analog stuff and then we started doing digital stuff, but we didn't really understand. We did not do what we needed to be doing. But we get it now. We're doing better, I'd say. We get it now, but it's still, there's a lot to unpack.
Okay, time for the fun portion of the presentation. Right. So I think the previous what Jason and Laura has articulated is the value of metadata, the value of data provenance, why we collect data about artifacts for research, for historical record, etc., and why that's important. And I think I'm going to, for lack of a better way, I'm going to show how that's not being done, why that's not being done, and maybe articulate the costs as well for basically ignoring all of this in the pursuit of using machine learning techniques and generative AI. So I'm just going to get a few high-level kind of like recent-ish articles in the AI space related to data transparency and data provenance. So what happens when you want to train an AI model is you don't just go out and scrape the internet yourself often. Most is you create a data set and there's data brokers that kind of collect these and sell these. It gets repackaged, rescraped, reformatted in a whole number of different, in a whole host of different ways. But really what happens is you try to scrape some amount of the internet or certain data, and you get a package. And sometimes elements of that package get rearranged, and there's little, if any, type of documentation for those changes. And so the provenance of that data to train these increasingly powerful models kind of falls by the wayside because you just want to train your model, you just want to get it to market, or you just want to start making money or start publishing, why it's so amazing, so on and so forth. So it is a fact that data sets that are used to train these models, it comes off as like, oh, we use data set X to train a model, but really it's kind of a whole constellation of poorly documented groups or sets of data. Right. This is another report that's more recent. AI writ large, I'm not just talking about generative AI, but AI writ large is increasingly multimodal. That means it's creating video, it's creating audio, it's creating text, it's creating combinations of those. There's someone at the OSU campus that says he can, with a single prompt, kind of create your own TV show. I don't think it's like going to win any Oscars anytime soon, but you can imagine if some faculty member at OSU could do that quickly today, what's going to happen in 5 years? So AI companies aren't just looking for text, they're looking for images, they're looking for audio, they're looking for video. Where do you get that? Where's most of that data coming from? Social media platforms on the one hand, TikTok videos. And then also there's increasingly amount of data used to train these models that are synthetic, which functionally means an AI is creating the data. One AI is creating a data set that is used to train another. There's arguments about model collapse happening as a result if there's biases or problems in data set that is created synthetically or not. And you keep on training, AI on different AI outputs. Eventually that bias could be replicated or even expanded. Okay, 80% of content from each modality carries undocumented restrictions in the dataset sources. So you have a data set, it's a combination or a collection of different types of data, and the problem is 80% of that content may have restrictions, it may not, but that isn't articulated in the larger core kind of data set that is being kind of packaged. And so we don't know. So for instance, there may be like, it's common now to have a CC but non-commercial application, like an NC license on certain data sets. But what IT companies or tech companies are finding is if you just bundle a bunch of them kind of together, you can kind of, in one sense, ignore those. You're not saying, I'm not commercializing this little individual piece of data or this data set. Well, it's part of a larger data set, and therefore, kind of, I don't need to worry about it, and no one's going to ask a question because it's not distinctively just using that like specific ingredient. You just throw it into a pot and you say it's a proprietary mix. And then lastly, it's these data that are training increasingly important and powerful Gen AI models are consistently Western-centric. North American and European organizations basically highly dominate speech and video. So there's likely going to be costs. There's certain cultural assumptions and norms that are going to be represented in these videos if they are predominantly English-centered or Western-centric. I just went to the Middle East somewhat recently. There is work on, say, Arabic, an Arabic AI model, but to be frank, it's just not quite as powerful because there's just a lot more English data available. So basically, there's a whole host of complexities related to not just the models themselves, but the data that is the increasing amounts of data that are required to train these models. All right, so I'll take the first stab, and maybe Jason, Lori, you can follow up. We have existing, there are in library information sciences, in the sciences themselves, there are common data provenance practices, metadata practices, but they are just simply not being followed in this AI world. Why that is, I'm sure there's a whole host of reasons, but there's likely going to be costs in not having that type of metadata or data provenance. Many of the data sets that are being used to train AIs have missing or incorrect licenses. And really, this is a huge policy level issue that's likely going to require significant coordination amongst research groups, committees, things like this group today, but also at universities levels, across universities, governments. This is not a problem that can be solved individually. And on top of it all, let me see if I could share this. Yeah. I don't know if you all know this, but AI continues to change and evolve, and it's going to likely continue to. So this morning in 5 minutes, there's this new tool that's exploratory from Google that's called Google Opal, where it's kind of trying to make it easy to link different AIs together, basically. So within 5 minutes, I was able to come up with a Polar research assistant that refines my research question, goes out and does research on the internet on my behalf, and then gives me a static website with that information, including links. It took me 5 minutes. This came out yesterday. This may not, there's definitely some quirks, there's some limitations here for what I just shared with you. But in 6 months, a year's time, not only are we going to be inundated with AI, which we all use every day. If you check email, there's AI spam filters, or I said use Google Maps. Healthcare is increasingly use AI. Mental health care is increasingly using AI. Not only is that becoming more part of our daily lives, but we're likely going to be able to link different AI systems together. And on top of that, it's becoming more agentic, meaning it's increasingly able to go out and do things on our behalf. So there's a whole host of related issues there, but all of that downstream things kind of don't matter, or the upstream problems related to data provenance kind of impact, I think, the future of AI, and it's something we should be considering. But also, we have tools, we have existing workflows for this for very important reasons. All right, I'll stop talking there. Jason?
So for some of the latter bullet points there, and I guess we'll introduce you now as Michael Flierl, new Polar researcher who has an assistant. I mean, it begs the question, and I'll start maybe with my last bullet point here. You know, the speed at which they can ingest content, query databases, generate content themselves creates this space where, you know, we're used to fielding questions and having tools that filter for, is this a email I should respond to? The bot at some level being sophisticated enough, you enter an arms race, whereas the filter able to clear out queries we're receiving via email that maybe are specious versus ones that are credible, but ones that are credible from a person versus an analytical tool that's been created, that you're now responding to an AI bot that's requesting information that goes above and beyond what your collections make available. This is a book that came out recently that just was kind of looking at the speed at which everything's happening, the speed at which we operate, which appears quite slow compared to the speed at which some of the AI tools are operating. And what does that mean when we're ordering operating at different magnitudes with rates there. And, the tools that we're building and the filters we're building to parry requests that really aren't valid. I think some of the challenges we've had before that have typically faced archives, having individuals have to leave things at the door and coming only in with a pencil because we don't want to see collections adulterated or things walk out the door, but also things added to collections. We have a non-archival grade collection of these 22, 23 terabytes of video that we accidentally ended up with as a result of a project that I have to figure out how to back up. And we set it up so that only 2 of us can delete from the collection just to avoid things being deleted. But I really wasn't thinking of people wanting to add to the collection unintentionally as a security issue because they want to make Antarctic landscapes to be out what they are. So if I in 10 years pass this collection on to somebody and we have this really rich video collection of Antarctic landscapes before ice was lost, well, what if somebody adds information to that collection that really wasn't real? And I don't know that happened because it was dropped in by some kind of tool nefariously. Is that harder to control in a digital landscape because there's the extensive collection is so extensive, and that wasn't a hazard I was really considering, but maybe I should be. And then the other one is, as Michael mentioned, I think you referred to as model collapse, or what I think about is from doing sound and lighting in high school as feedback. If you have outputs that are AI generated that are feeding back into these products, what does that mean for the quality of what's there? Things that are becoming biased based on the original collection, and you get these feedback cycles that really are not doing stuff productively. Once again, this doesn't answer maybe some of the questions you have. These are just things to keep in mind that are not necessarily new hazards, just hazards with a new tool, and a new tool that operates pretty quickly, but needs all of the checks that we've had to worry about in collections for a long time.
So one example in archives right now is that we are trying to add alt text to images that we have online. And so we're using an AI tool to create the alt text for this image set. It's doing a pretty good job overall, but there are many thousands of images in this collection, and we don't trust the tool enough to just let it roll, right? So a human still has to look at the alt text that was created, see if it's accurate. It is not always accurate. It's like just, I think we've done, I don't know, 600, let's say, 10% roughly are wrong. So, or could be better. So my student did one the other day, he told me about it. It said a group of people in front of a vehicle. And he said it was 2 guys in front of a Jeep. So, okay, it wasn't exactly wrong, but we're trying to make it better, remembering what alt text is for. So if someone's using a screen reader, they will have a more accurate image of what the image is. So anyway, so for me, the questions become related to resources, time, money. So we are using AI to create this alt text on this huge data set, but we still don't really trust it. So we're going to go through there and we're going to spend all this time fixing the ones that are wrong. But at what point do we decide, good enough? Good enough, let it roll. We don't have this kind of time. Good enough. Those are the questions that come into my mind about this moving forward, is because at some point, if this is the route we're going down, we are going to just have to accept some levels of inaccuracy. Not like it's perfect now in the analog world. We all know it's not, but there's just some level of speed at which we're moving on this, and this requirement to create alt text to make things more accessible, it's a very complicated, and it's a big question, really. This is Michael's image. I love it. But look at the word transparency. Look at that. Look at how it's spelled wrong, right? This is kind of the point. It doesn't always get it right.
Although I just tried a new model, Nano Banana, with like basically the same prompt, and I got something different. I did tell it to be
Ooh,
more impressionistic and artsy,
ooh.
but the perspective is all wrong. The person is way too large for that to be a mountain. Also, like text is better in the newer image generation models. It's a little bit more clear. But that's also part of it. Like this is AI is inherently unpredictable. That is, at least generative AI technology is designed to be such. That's useful in some applications and less so for others. But it is certainly, you can argue, a cost.
And circling back to our, early example of 1906 and Dr. Cook and what is evidence in 1906 and what is evidence in 2025? Is it easier or harder to evaluate provenance now? Like knowing where you are, all our photos are tagged and, in 1906, unless somebody was with you to corroborate your story. All we got is your word. Maybe you took some measurements, you wrote it in your diary, all that. Anyway, it's just things to consider. The GPS, digital photography embeds locations. Just it's a different world and a handful of pictures with you know a witness for verification. Again, the problems are similar but different. Um, yeah.
And I think some of us know from publication, more peer review publications are asking not just for the article and text and the data, are asking for information on the software you use, the version of software, the model you ran, nuance on the model. So what's being asked here for an AI tool or a collection it's based on really is very consistent with that. But allowing somebody to potentially replicate what you did or where some error was manifest or problem was manifest in it. Now, whether we can run those models 10 years from now, because has anybody bothered to save them? Will it even be possible to recreate? At least you've said, here's how I did it, is being a consideration that peer review is trying to capture already for some of our other analytical methods. Then we had two citations we included here. I think, Michael, the first one is some of the information you presented that unpacks those data sets. The second is a seminar.
Yes, that's correct.
The second is a seminar that was given here just on an example from the series of universities in the middle of the US thinking about geospatial data and maps and how digital maps are in some countries being stored from government agencies for research purposes later. Some are being stored at a medium level of access, and some, like many US states, actually are not saving anything. So if you want to go back and do historical work, you might, state by state or country by country, might determine whether you have access to any archive that's usable in the future. It's a good example just to think from the map perspective, and then you can generalize to other collections more broadly. And I think with that, we'll take questions. We're actually really happy for dialogue as well. This was designed to be more of a presentation to entertain conversation. If we opened up more questions than we answered, that's actually our intent.
Everyone is overwhelmed. I'll put out a question. So we've talked about a couple examples of things we are actually doing using AI. What are other folks doing in your libraries?
Or what would you like to do?
Well, here in Finland, we use AI in libraries for helping us with indexing our students' thesis or when they in the studies they have to write a thesis. So we will use an AI tool for giving automatically those subject headings for them, and that's working quite well.
Thank you, Susanna.
Yeah, I think that's a particularly useful application, and I'm excited to see where that can go moving forward as well. I think there's a lot of other comparable applications.
So, true confession, when I wrote the little article for the bulletin about Columbus, I used AI. Why should I create an article about Columbus, Ohio? Come on now. Lots of information about Columbus exists. So I did tell it, I forget what my exact prompt. I think I said, tell me what is great about Columbus, Ohio in June in 2 paragraphs. And then I did go in, I sent it to Jason. I'm like, hey, this is not half bad. And we did tweak it a tiny, but not a lot. Not a lot. It worked. It for certain things, I think it's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, and stuff you can ground truth, especially. Our first use on our team was probably 3 years ago. We had it write some code that a student wanted to do a time comparison between the estimate to code it by hand versus building it with an AI tool. But that's another example we could ground truth. Was it functioning correctly, giving us the data we wanted? Another one, and I won't go into details because Laura and I are still parsing this out, is we have a collection that has very inaccessible handwriting that almost nobody can read. But we have some transcripts that allow us to have the original handwriting versus transcribed. So an AI tool might be excellent there because currently historians have no access to that collection if they can't read it. And right now, almost nobody can read it. You could also ground truth coming out and then sample a certain percentage to see if it had high fidelity. So it seems like another pretty well constrained project that could have an AI application because we can ground truth it worked right.
Yeah, that sounds fine. But we have Shannon first and Sandy then who want to say something.
Of course, my dogs have started barking the second I'm able to unmute. Score. So we have experimented a little with AI, some of it without my knowledge. Some of my staff members, well, one staff member, thought it would be easier to do cataloging of our journal articles and things using an AI tool to go in and do the cataloging into a spreadsheet. I do think that application has some potential. Like there are a lot of things where it's cutting and pasting from one to the other. Like when you're looking at abstracts, titles, like it should be fillable. But I will say at this juncture, it's more trouble than it's worth, at least for us. I know my staff member was well-meaning, but AI was not putting in the titles wholly. Might do a partial title. It wouldn't necessarily include all the authors. It definitely wasn't doing our formatting correctly. So our formatting was all over the place, field to field. And I think we took more time cleaning up that mess than we did actually saving time in the actual cataloging. Had a chat with the staff member afterwards that maybe this experiment is better left for another day. But like these are things that, especially, I don't know whether I really want to word it this way, but I will say people that are newer to the field are looking for some of these time-saving hacks that they think are going to work really well. And I know I'm old school, but I'm not against using AI necessarily. And I do think time saving is great, but I think it requires a lot of testing before you just run with it. It's not something, and that was a great example of it looks like it's going to save time. I see what you wanted to do there, but I have spent 5 months cleaning my database to get all of that junk out of there. So, lesson learned.
That's kind of in line with my alt text example.
one piece to that is I think, periodic experimentation, it might be good to keep your eye to the ground and always say, like, do we want to do trials of stuff intermittently? But if you do, even if you are using a tool, sometimes we forget ourselves serve as the audit, right? When you're doing something, you get feedback on it. So what is the audit that you build in to say, we're going to check 5% of whatever method we're using if we're deploying something like this periodically, and then making sure the metadata encodes how it was those things that were done automatically. If you decide to use a tool in the future, you have the window you used it and the fact it was an AI tool that did it, so you could retroactively go back and correct a window. If you didn't have that logged, you wouldn't know which period you should even look for those mistakes in if it was found out, 10 years from now. So I think my brother's an accountant, and we often talk a bit about you can't get everything to the nearest penny, so you sometimes have checks in place. And he always is asking me, what's your audit method to go in and sample to see if things are operating fine? And I think we forget about ourselves as human. We are a running auditor on it at times. We're doing those checks, knowledgeable folks. These other tools, once they get going, in your case, even if the abstract started coming in differently and it worked for 20 years, all of a sudden the formatting changes, the AI might go off the rails because doesn't know that new formatting's coming. So.
And I'll just very quickly, I put in a link to the Library of Congress, their AI planning process. They have a blog. They kind of developed a framework for how they approach AI in their kind of library setting, which is obviously unique, but I still think it's worth checking out. But Shannon, that type of issue is common, I hear. And also two, that may be true today. In 6 months, all of those problems could be solved. Gemini 3 just came out today. Who the heck knows what the future is? But I think that pragmatic mindset of, is this useful to me? Totally. I think that's 100% the way to go with this.
Yeah, I think we need to do small batch testing, not necessarily let it have rain. Don't let it have rain. Take your time with it.
It's like,
Okay,
Sandy, you're next. Yeah.
Sandy, you're next. Yeah.
So, two things. First, when we did the first video script for the Dallam Digital Library, which of course is now recorded and up in French and English and shortly in Finnish, but the original English cut was done. Sarah Papel did that with an AI. She just gathered up a bunch of stuff and asked it to generate the script for us. Unfortunately, the material that she had was more about Dallam than about the digital library, so we ended up modifying it a lot. So it really is the feedstock that defines the function of the outcome. So that's one thing. The other question that I had, and I may have missed this in the presentation, was, do we have standards now for citing when we use an AI to create something like that? I think, Laura, on yours, you said it was generated with AI, but I'm wondering if there are standards there. And of course, I haven't gone and looked at, AP or anybody else.
Michael, you probably know a lot more about standards than I do, but okay, so did I tell you in my article about Columbus that it was generated with AI? No, I did not. I did not tell you until right now. But in some commercial productions that I am aware of, I am aware that, for instance, as everybody knows, I love that stupid Shackleton movie, okay? Endurance is so good. But they use AI to generate the voices of the men on the expedition so they can read from their diary. That is, we are told that. They do disclose that prominently. It's not hidden. So you might not get it in the beginning of the movie, but if you watch the credit, they tell us. But by and large, I don't really know the answer to that. Maybe Michael and Jason, you have more.
So yeah, it depends widely. I just a good link from Purdue that kind of lists APA Chicago, which is basically just hey, I used it, and then different journals, different disciplines are approaching this differently. But long story short, if you used AI in any way, shape, or form, typically there has to be some type of acknowledgement. I see now there's AI usage statements in some journals. So that's still like an emerging area depending on the distance. Some disciplines are further than others. But in general, now the expectation is if you used AI, one, AI can't be a co-author. Two, AI is now being increasingly used for data analysis, image creation, etc. And then three, you have to disclose. You have to be transparent in what you're using AI for. So I honestly, it's something I think we should advocate collectively, that we need to be transparent and clear about what is AI.
I wonder if we could then, Susanna and Christy, I think you're here as well. If we could put an AI use statement on the bulletin at least, or publish something in there that says this is what we as PLC expect when people use AI to generate things that get published in the bulletin.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I use very little AI when I write something because I want to use my own brains. Something I just check something sometimes, but I really love to use my brains and train my English also. But Michael, there's a question in the chat from Becky. Becky, have you spent much time with software that checks for AI content? Or is it for Michael, Jason, or Laura?
I could jump in just real quick. Long story short is, no, I would not trust any type of AI detection software. Full stop. I did just go to a talk yesterday. I linked to the Google Scholar profile. This is a computer scientist at Maryland, which has a pretty strong computer science program, saying that they found there's some software detection that maybe could be like pretty accurate. But even then, the threshold for saying, yes, it's AI generated is about a 75% certainty threshold. So how much can you use that? If an AI says it's 82% certain that something's AI generated, is that useful? I don't know how accurate, what's the false positive rate for that, et cetera, et cetera.